Well, we're back live now here in Alexandria, Virginia, with Elizabeth Voss, my co-host in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Well, Elizabeth, that was quite a lot there.
Absolutely.
It's difficult. It's difficult. Just a moment. I'm getting a feedback here. Yes,
it sounds good now, I think, at least on my end. But yeah, I mean, I'm very glad that we were able to talk to both Michael Isikoff and Ed Butowsky in successive weeks to get kind of both sides of the story. And the problem with this story, to me, seems to be that we don't have conclusive evidence on either side of this. But I think that when it comes to Isikoff's portrayal of this, narrative where you have Russian spies planting disinfo regarding Seth Rich, I think there's much less supportive evidence for that type of narrative than there is for, Ed's story. We do have the video, as we played earlier, of Ellen Ratner discussing this, DNC insider. There is the audio from Seymour Hersh. So I think there is a little bit more weight to what Ed was saying.
Yeah, it's just very difficult to dismiss this story as a crazy theory, the way Isikoff and others in the mainstream, kind of demanding that we do. And out of nowhere, that story came, as if people are talking about it a lot. I don't know why he even did that story. Medium that posts people's articles, they have a rule where any story that mentions Seth Rich will now be removed.
I have heard of that.
What are they afraid of? I mean, it's almost like, raising it to the level of Holocaust denial or something, or 9/11 stuff. And I don't think anybody's talking that much about Seth Rich, and I would not put it on in any way equivalent to denying the Holocaust. So we are talking about it here. That's to say, as you just did, Elizabeth, that we just don't know what the truth is about this. You cannot dismiss this because of what Assange said on Dutch TV, in which he said and didn't say that that Seth Rich was the source. The $20,000 reward for knowledge about leading to the arrest of someone who killed Seth Rich, given out by WikiLeaks. We have the Ellen Ratner thing that we just saw, although she did not say it was Seth Rich. She did say it was a Democratic insider. We've got Cy, as we heard on the tape, saying he has that source in the FBI. We've got this very interesting response that I want to talk to you a little about in detail, Elizabeth, from the NSA, the National Security Agency, to the FOIA request made by Butowsky and his lawyer, Ty Clevenger, asking whether Rich had communicated with any of several people, and we'll get into that in a moment. But then we also have Seth Rich's parents absolutely denying that any of this happened. Ellen Ratner saying to Isikoff that she never heard of Seth Rich before, this character, that just didn't happen. So somebody's lying here. I mean, maybe Assange made that up to cover his tracks. Somebody's lying here. We just don't know who it is. I mean, that's the fascinating thing about this. But I don't think we can just dismiss this. I don't think putting Ed on means that we believe everything he said either. I just don't know. But you would agree, Elizabeth, that somebody's not telling the truth here, right?
Absolutely. And I think the really unfortunate, core situation that we have is that it comes down to a he said, she said, essentially. And I think that has caused a lot of confusion for people. But I think, when people focus on the quote lack of evidence, to make a final conclusion about Seth Rich, I think there is, a greater lack of evidence when it comes to the assumptions and the narrative that Isikoff was trying to create. So I think that it's interesting that so much focus is on, well, if you even discuss Seth Rich's name, then you're a conspiracy theorist. But I think equally, I mean, we have, after everything that's happened with Russiagate, with Mueller's testimony recently, I mean, I think it's equally important to point out the degree to which Russiagate and Isikoff's discussion of Seth Rich is also a conspiracy theory. And so to put them on equal terms, at least, I think is important.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But if it's completely rubbish, never happened, what a joke, why are they talking about it? I mean,
exactly.
Why are they giving fuel to this thing? We wouldn't be doing this program if it weren't for this Conspiracy Land series that Isikoff and Yahoo News are doing. We wouldn't have had him on. I brought him on to have him answer questions about his reporting. And I think that there are a lot of holes in his reporting. He admitted that the Russians were unlikely to use a website like that. He admitted that the Washington Post story said that this stuff had been out about Rich's possible connection to this before that Russian bulletin. He admitted he'd never seen that bulletin. He only took the word for it from this former prosecutor who he thinks saw an English translation of it. He later on in his report, by the way, says this was purported details from this Russian intelligence agency, whereas earlier in the article he made it sound certain. So again, we wouldn't have had this program with him. We would not have invited Ed Butowsky on. We wouldn't be talking about this right now if it weren't for Isikoff's and Yahoo's decision to make this an issue again. And so if they don't want people talking about it, I mean, or if they think it's nonsense, I don't see why focusing on that is a wise thing. They just want to seem to kill it off once and for all. But in fact, they've just revived it, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and I think the timing is really interesting, and the only thing I can really relate it to, the timing of this, is Mueller's testimony. I think that this was an attempt, in some sense, to revive the Seth Rich issue in order to deflect from Mueller's testimony and the kind of failure of the Mueller collusion narrative, especially when you look at Isikoff's history writing the book that he did.
Yes, he did. We could have. It would have been gratuitous, I think, on my part to go after him on his failures about collusion. He's admitted that already, which, unlike Luke Harding and others. And our show last week was not about the collusion issue;
Right.
It was about Rich. But I don't know if anybody saw that performance by Mueller yesterday. Before we get into that, I do want to talk about that. I just want to go over this letter that came from the National Security Agency. Now, I have gotten letters like this from FOIAs I've sent in, and this looks like a genuine letter from the National Security Agency. And it says here that the request that was made by Butowsky through his lawyer, Ty Clevenger, they asked for all documents, records, or communications referencing or containing communications between Seth Rich and any of the following. Now, this is what is maybe a mistake, because they give a long list of people here.
Yes.
So Seth Rich between Seth Rich and Julian Assange, Seth Rich between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks, between Seth Rich and Kim.com, Rich and Aaron Rich, his brother, which is, there would be probably a huge trove of documents there. Sean Lucas, we can talk a little about him. You know about him. Kelsey Mulker, Imran Awan, Abid Awan, and Jamal Awan, all of whom worked for Debbie Wasserman Schultz in her congressional office, and then Hina Alvi, Rao Abbas, I don't know who those people are, or any persons or entity outside of the United States. So the response they got was that your request has been processed under the provisions of the FOIA, 15 documents totaling 32 pages responsive to your request have been reviewed by this agency as required by the FOIA and have been found to be currently and properly classified in accordance with Executive Order 13526. In other words, they've confirmed that there has been communication between Seth Rich and one or any of these, one, all, or some of these people I mentioned, including his brother. Now, if his brother, if it was only a communication with his brother, you would think that they would say that. They wouldn't, I think, keep all these people here, us thinking that he could have had communications with Kim.com, that he could have had communications with Julian Assange or with any of these people. If he was being portrayed by Isikoff as a lowly DNC worker who didn't have any computer access to the emails that were eventually linked, that's what the conspiracy land story says. If he were that, would he be talking to any of these people other than his brother and maybe Sean Lucas, Elizabeth?
I don't think so, but I think that the difficulty is that the FOIA that we've gotten doesn't answer definitively whether we can. It does not prove that Seth Rich had any contact with WikiLeaks. It does not prove that he had any contact with Julian Assange, and that's the problem. That's the issue, that it's being that particular FOIA and the response to that FOIA is being misrepresented as proof of that. And I think that, unfortunately, it's just as murky as not having the access to that FOIA at all. I mean, it really doesn't give us any new information other than the fact that he probably is not the just lowly DNC staffer that Isikoff presents him as.
Oh, okay. By the way, Ray McGovern is joining us. Ray, welcome. I see your Assange beard is still going strong. Did you get to see there you go, saving money on razor blades, as they say. Have you get a chance to see Ed Butowsky's interview with us?
I did not, but I know a good bit about what's going on here. And I think that I rely more on what Seymour Hersh said inadvertently to Butowsky than the other information. I'd like to pick up on what Elizabeth said just now. I have to agree with her. She's a keen analyst, and if you look at the FOIA response from the Puzzle Factory from NSA, you can't really pin any specific correspondence between Seth Rich and any of those characters. Big mistake. They asked for too much, and they got not enough discernible connection. However, we know that Kim.com has bragged about having helped Seth Rich be in touch with WikiLeaks. And so there's very little doubt in my mind, especially given what Cy Hersh has said, that there was communication, and that when the FBI knew about that, they went up in smoke, and that was why we know so little about follow-up. Cy Hersh, as you know, was caught inadvertently spilling the beans to Butowsky. And what he said was very, very interesting. He talked about having a very high-level source in the FBI who will do what he wants, what Cy asked him to do. And this source did find correspondence between Seth and WikiLeaks. And that the story that Cy Hersh tells is that Seth and his brother Aaron were interested in money. Yeah, that's kind of, I don't like to hear that. But they offered a little sample, apparently, reportedly, according to Cy. And, Cy doesn't make stuff up. They offered a little sample of juicy emails, and a Dropbox was gotten access to by WikiLeaks, according to Cy. And I don't know the rest of the story, but it seems to me that there's ample evidence that this was the Hersh brothers. And if you try to figure out why Mr. and Mrs. Hersh,
the Rich brothers, and Mrs. Rich.
Not Hersh, but Rich. Sorry about
I didn't know
that.
Cy's parents were involved in this.
No. Why the beard interferes with my brain sometimes.
Apparently, yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
Look.
No, if you're wondering why Seth Rich's parents are so reluctant to have this story bandied about, well, this is all speculative on my part. Unlike the forensics that Bill Binney and others have done, this is conjecture, okay? So let's draw that clear demarcation between the acts of the principles of physics and forensics and what I'm about to say. But we know that as soon as this hit the fan, the Democrats put a minder with the Rich family, who was their liaison, so to speak, with the media. That's suspicious off the bat. And then, of course, if I'm correct, relying on what Cy Hersh told Butowsky, well, then it is sort of possible that the Rich family would not want it bandied about, not only that both Seth and Aaron were involved in this thing, but they did it for money. That's not what I want to believe, and that's certainly what the Rich family would not want anyone to believe. And besides, Seth is dead, but Aaron, as far as I know, is still roaming around. So there are personal reasons why there would be resistance on the part of the Rich family to have this bandied about. But what Cy says is pretty conclusive to me. It speaks volumes that he was taped saying this without his knowledge. That's not a nice trick to pull on anyone. And he certainly wants to protect whatever sources he had for this information. But there's much, much more substance to this, given all this, and the lawsuit, of course, which Butowsky is pursuing now, to get it out of the category of conspiracy theory. Now, let me just say one word about conspiracy theory. In intelligence and in political matters, this expression drew incredible life from a fellow named Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was the first big head, well, wasn't the first, but he was the big head of the CIA. And actually, there's evidence that Allen Dulles and CIA cronies, as well as military and other cronies, were involved in the assassination of John Kennedy. Okay? Now, after John Kennedy was assassinated, and they were putting together this Warren Commission, and Warren was, titular head like Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller didn't seem to know what was in his report. I'm sure that Chief Justice Warren didn't know what was in his report either. Who did? Who did? Who was running that investigation? Allen Dulles. Now, when people said, well, this is a little extraordinary, Allen Dulles is just cashiered by the president, right? And you don't do that to that kind of, big shot. And people think, and there's reason to believe, that the CIA hated him so much that they took part in his assassination. So how can you justify Allen Dulles being on the Warren Commission, picking out the witnesses and arranging the whole thing? How can you justify that? You know what the response was? Conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory. Come on. Allen Dulles is very knowledgeable. He's a member of the establishment. He will make sure that the right thing is done here. And you people who criticize that are conspiracy theorists. That's when it was given a great big push of adrenaline. And today, it's down to today, it works with the media. And just to finish up on this, when we were composing our seminal memorandum on Russian hacking, in quotes, the leak, not in quotes, the one we put out on July 24, 2017, and we gave to the president, and he followed up by asking Pompeo, then CIA director, to interview Bill Binney, one of ours. That exercise, and then the one that followed, where Patrick Lawrence wrote an article based on our VIPS report for The Nation, there was a hue and cry on everybody who wished us well. Please don't mention the Seth Rich conspiracy theory. Now, these were upstanding young people, some of them a little older, but they were so fixated on our not being blackened by mentioning Seth Rich that, when we looked at it, we had a little conference and we said, well, it's not really essential to our story. Our story is the principles of physics, it's forensics, it's stuff that we can prove. So let's leave it out. But wasn't it interesting? And here, more than 2 years later, actually exactly 2 years later, we're doing a follow-up on this thing with much more meat, given Butowsky and given Hersh and given the other things that have come up, which show that this is an extraordinary story. How it pieces together, luckily, will come out in the wash, that is, in the court, and that's a good thing.
You think so, Ray? That's. I hope you're right about that, because as I said to Elizabeth before you came on, somebody's not telling the truth in this story, and I'm not quite sure who it is yet. The Democrats would say they said Brad Bauman to the Rich family to protect him against reporters,
right,
and others. So we'll give him that. Now, Cy, I told this to Ed in the interview that I learned from somebody close to Cy, and you know who this is going to be, Ray, but that Cy was still working on the story. He had that source in the FBI, but he didn't have enough cooperation because he didn't have the report in his hand. He only had this guy reading from it to him, so he needed more. So he gets on the horn to Butowsky in Dallas, and I think trying to find out what Ed knows. Ed's saying, no, he didn't want to know anything from me. Well, as a reporter, of course, he's trying to learn what he can from anybody he's talking to. And then what happened was, when the leaked tape of Cy's conversation came out, that Cy was not aware that he was being taped. He communicated that to me in an email saying how angry that made him, that burned up all of his sources. When that tape came out, they don't want to talk to him anymore. because the public heard that he had a source inside the FBI and he was senior level. So that was a really bad mistake on Butowsky's part. Of course, he's denying all of that. So what do you think about that, Ray? Did you hear the same thing? And that's what killed the story, why Sy never wrote about it.
Well, I have a pretty good notion. I've talked to Sy as well. Sy is psychotic about protecting his sources. I mean, that's how he's made his living, and that's how he's made his mark in the public world. That's why he's gotten so many Pulitzer Prizes. I think he couldn't believe he was so unfortunate as to have been taped talking to Butowsky. And my impression, and this is more than just an impression, is that Sy was deathly afraid that the person that he had sort of identified by role, senior, and could go in would be caught at it. And, you know, the FBI has all manner of ways of finding these things out. I mean, every telephone conversation and every email and so forth, as discreet as Sy may have been, for all we know, this person was in extreme jeopardy. And so Sy just decided, well, the least I can do is now shut up about it. I don't want to say anything more about it, and hopefully it will die down. Maybe the FBI won't catch this guy, but let's just hope. And and meanwhile, what can I do except shut up about it? Now, problem is he didn't shut up about it. I mean, the problem is that until after he was taped, he laid it all out, and he laid it all out in a very authoritative way. There was no suggestion that he was slurring or, you know, drunk or anything like that. He was telling, I listened to it earlier today. So I tend to think that Sy had this very, very good picture. He says things that are a little discordant. He says, well, he doesn't think that Seth was killed for this reason. It was a really bad neighborhood. But the idea is that once the FBI got a hold of his computer, well, that changed the whole scenario. DC police were out of it. And then what do we know? Well, all we know is what Sy says, and that is that there's a lot of evidence on that computer that there were direct links between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks. And of course, Julian Assange, you probably have already mentioned that. That was a very bizarre kind of semi-recognition that Seth Rich may have been playing a role here. You'll recall that Danish interviewer asked him about that, and if I recall correctly, Julian said, well, this shows the risks that sources such as we use run. And then the Danish fellow was really quick. Well, so that mean was he your source? And Julian said, no, that's we don't identify as sources, but I'll tell you what, we're going to give a $20,000 reward. Now, what's that all about? A reward for somebody who finds out who killed Seth Rich. Well, that said to me at the time, well, yeah, Julian is very good about protecting his sources, but if this one's dead, you know, he doesn't have to be protected anymore. And, you know, that's a pretty simple explanation. But then, you know, it's so murky. And, you know, well, what do I think? I think that Seth Rich did play a role. I think Kim.com is quite honest in saying that he helped them get in touch. I think Seymour Hersh has spilled the beans. And so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting in court to see how Butowsky fares in proving his case. I regret that I wasn't able to tune into the interview with Butowsky. Is there something I should know that I don't?
I think we pretty much, yes, Elizabeth.
Well, I don't think you missed anything significant from Ed Butowsky's interview, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about was this issue where we have, you know, the Russiagate proponents basically saying, well, you know, this is all conspiracy theory around Seth Rich, but we also have, we had, you know, Kristen Hafrenson, current editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, come on Consortium, CN Live a couple of weeks ago, and he basically, when Joe asked him, can you confirm whether this was a leak or a hack? He said, well, you know, he didn't want to address that directly, but he said, well, you know, there can be multiple He referenced multiple sources, which also is something that Craig Murray has talked about. And I think that that gets forgotten a lot when we do discuss Seth Rich, Russian conspiracy theories, etc., leak versus hack. We forget that there can be multiple sources, and the whole issue of Podesta emails or other aspects of this could be in addition to Seth Rich. So I think that's another layer of complication on this whole story.
I agree, but I don't think it's all that complicated. We knew from, well, I think Craig Murray, Ambassador Murray, that the leak, and I say leak advisedly, for the Podesta emails is very different from the leak for the late May DNC emails that Julian Assange was given. So there's two leaks right there. Also, technically speaking, they bear dissimilarities. The DNC stuff was saved onto an external storage device on the FAT, the file allocation
Table,
Yeah.
which shows that it was it was copied off a computer and put in this format, which has nothing to do with the net, or the internet, or the web. And that was done before WikiLeaks released it. So we have that, and then we have the Podesta emails, which was not saved in the FAT format. So there's internal evidence, forensic evidence, that there are two leaks right there. Why don't I say hack? Well, NSA would have it if it were a hack. And the download speed, of course, proves that Guccifer, that fraud, tried his best to sell this hacking theory, and screw it up to the extent that anyone doing the forensics, like Bill Binney and Forensicator, could see that the download speed could not have been a hack. I mean, by the principles of physics, by fluid dynamics, for God's sake, it couldn't have been a hack over the internet. It had to be a copy onto a thumb drive. And bizarrely, the speed was exactly the same as a thumb drive could tolerate. So, I think we're really good on this. The question is whether we can make sure that the court, that we can help whoever it is that needs help, show the court that this is what we think, and we have this to prove it. And then we have the third court case, over the last month or so, which show not only this business about Seth Rich, but the business about CrowdStrike, never really giving a final report to James Comey. And then the other thing about the so-called Internet Research Agency, where the judge looked at those Justice Department lawyers and says, okay, the accused is saying, prove that the IRA, I hate to say IRA, I know what the IRA, but the Internet Research Agency, prove that they're working for the Russian government. And the lawyer said, well, Bob Mueller said so. And the judge says, that's proof? Well, actually, Bob Mueller didn't say so. And then later he said so. And so the judge said, look, get out of here and don't mention this again as if it's proof, because you don't have any proof.
Ray, we're going to move on to move on to the Mueller testimony. But before that, there was the Ellen Ratner video that emerged from a conference that she gave a few days before the election. So did you see that?
I did see that.
Okay. So she doesn't say Rich's name, but she says it's a Democratic insider. That's significant. And I want to ask you just a general question. Why did you think Isikoff has, first of all, done this entire series? And why does he make it very clear that the FBI did not get involved in this whatsoever? It was purely the DC local police. Why is he doing this?
I hate to impute malign motives, but I think it has to do with what Yahoo News is paying him. And I'm sure that he has beneficent people who like him to tell the story. I thought he was going to go straight. You'll recall back in December when he gave an interview to a pretty, conservative guy, and a conservative guy says, now, Michael, it's proven that the Steele dossier was largely correct, right? No. Isikoff says no. Now the P tape and all that stuff, no, it's not largely correct. and then he obfuscated the reasons. But I thought maybe he'd say, well, all right, I was led down the garden path by sources that I used to trust, CIA sources and others. And so he'd reform and acknowledge, but no, I guess
he's being led down. There's more than one garden path, and he's been led down more than one, perhaps.
Yeah.
Ray, let's move on to Mueller because we only have really a few minutes left. Now,
Okay.
I wrote in Consortium News that I thought, as many people did, that he was approaching senility, and then all of a sudden, when he wanted to make a political point, man, this clarity of mind came back suddenly. And the main thing for me was, again, the obsession with the source of a documents, authenticated documents, namely the Clinton and the DNC and Podesta emails. They have the documents. It doesn't matter who the source is, and that's proven by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, other media having anonymous Dropboxes now, just like pioneered by WikiLeaks. So they will, the Russians could even be sending stuff to the New York Times. And if it's real, maybe the New York Times is using it. What do they need to know? What did you take out of that? Is this story finally over, Ray, or not?
I hate to have the wish father to the thought here, but it is going to be overtaken by events now. We have the Department of Justice Inspector General coming out for the report. That's going to be really interesting. This Michael Horowitz seems to be, surviving in a pretty politicized atmosphere at the Department of Justice, who has purview over the FBI as well. So that's coming up. And then, of course, William Barr, the Attorney General, has been tasked by the president to get to the bottom of how this all started and what role high officials in our government have played. Now, the irony is, Joe, that they already know the answers to those questions. Now, how do I explain that? Well, Comey and Brennan, the head of the CIA, Clapper, the head of the National Intelligence, the guy from NSA, and people in the Justice Department were all sure about one thing in 2016, and that is that, as Comey said in his book, I was operating in an environment where the next president of the United States of America was bound to be Hillary Clinton, period, end quote. Okay, why do I say that? Well, if you're that sure of all this stuff, then you could take liberties with the law, with the Constitution. You can monitor people on Trump's staff. You can approve FISAs. Nobody's ever going to know. You're not going to get indicted. You're going to get promoted, right? So I use that when people say, how can you say every top official from the national security apparatus and from intelligence and from the law enforcement, how can they all be so? They all were so corrupt because they knew Hillary was going to win, in quotes, and they want to do everything to foster that so they get promoted in the end. So that's what happened. And so when William Barr, if he steps up to the plate, and I don't like William Barr, okay? I know his history, but people can rise to the occasion. And if the president has given him purview over declassifying documents, well, it's still going to be a tough slog, but he can go to the CIA and he can say, look, you guys, I have this letter from the president. If you don't give me this stuff, there's going to be trouble. Now, if he does that, and then finally, and most important, if the president doesn't throw Bill Barr under the bus, like he's thrown Devin Nunes under the bus twice, like he's thrown other people who are really onto this thing under the bus. In other words, if the president doesn't chicken out, he's got not only Barr, he's got not only Michael Horowitz, the IG of the Justice Department, but he's got this fellow, what's his name, Durham, up there in Connecticut. He's got three. And then there's this obscure guy from Idaho or Utah, the guy who's supposed to be helping. I even forget his name, but what's he doing all these years? So he's got high-powered people. If they want to get at the truth, whether it's for altruistic reasons like you and I, Joe, or whether it's for political reasons, that doesn't matter. If they get at the truth, this is going to be a really interesting next several months.
That was Ray McGovern, retired CIA analyst calling in from North Carolina and discussing the Seth Rich case and the Mueller testimony. And Ray, really thank you for coming on CN Live and giving us your several cents.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Elizabeth, for Elizabeth Voss and for everybody here at CN Live, we thank our guests, our audience, and we hope to see you next week when we have a little surprise for you. I have an audio tape interview with Kim.com that I did when I was in New Zealand some time ago, and he speaks very much about Seth Rich and these issues. So we'll be listening to that next week. Tune in next Friday, Eastern Daylight Time for CN Live.